Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. And to continue our tradition, our Christmas movie extravaganza reviews, this isn't precisely a Christmas movie in actuality, but it kind of takes place in Christmas somewhat, at least towards the end. And that is the Dreamer of Oz, the L. Frank Baum story. This was a made-for-TV movie that aired December 10th, 1990, starring Annette O'Toole of It fame. She played Beverly in Stephen King's the adaptation of Stephen King's It, uh, and John Ritter of Three's Company fame, as well as Rue McClanahan of Golden Girls fame. Rue McClanahan, of course, Branch Devereaux in Go the Golden Girls, and John Ritter, who played the part of Jack Tripper in Three's Company. And it aired on NBC. And this tells the story of how the Wizard of Oz came to be. Wizard of Oz, of course, a childhood classic. We talked about it. We have a review of it on this channel. The first time the Wizard of Oz ever aired on television was in 1956 on CBS, and became a staple from that point on television for many years on Christmas. This is telling how the story came to be, the life of L. Frank Baum, Lyman Frank Baum, who was born in the 1850s in New York and passed away in California in 1919. Well, it starts off at the premiere. It's 1939. It starts off in black and white, right? Again, just like Oz the Great and Powerful, and just like the original Wizard of Oz, it starts off in black and white. And Annette O'Toole was playing Maud Gage, the wife of L. Frank Baum. And everybody's talking about, it's the premiere of the movie. It's in Grauman's Chinese Theater in Los Angeles. And everybody is like looking for Judy Garland. They're looking for Billy Burke. They're looking for Margaret Hamilton. They're looking for the guy that played the Wizard of Oz. They're looking for all these stars of the 1939 film. Going right past them is Maud Gage. They don't even realize or even know that Maud is the wife of the creator of the Wizard of Oz, except for one journalist. One journalist notices her and says, "Are you L. Frank Baum's widow?" She says, "How do you know that?" He said, "I was a huge fan of the Oz books. I wrote my dissertation in college on the Oz books. I have all the Oz books, and I studied basically meticulously his life." He said, "I would love to know how the Oz books came to be, in particular, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Can you just take a few minutes out?" And she says, "Young man, that's going to take a lot more than a few minutes." And she goes into, first off, how she met Frank. And which is, and see, what it was she was attending Cornell University in upstate New York, and she was rooming with um, L. Frank Baum's cousin, because Cornell University at this time, this was 1882, uh, when they met each other. At this time, Cornell University only universities in the country, prestigious universities that accepted females. They had a co-ed dorms. Most did not accept women. So she's rooming with L. Frank Baum's cousin. So she gets invited by L. Frank Baum's cousin and his sister to spend the holidays with them. And they want her to meet up with Frank Baum because he's been introduced via his sister and his cousin to various women. In real life, it was his cousin, but they say it's his sister here. He's been introduced to various women throughout his life, and none of them have been successful. So they think, hey, she's an educated woman. She's into politics. Frank was himself into politics at this time, and maybe they'll hit it off. he comes in with a nosebleed. So immediately, they give us a little bit of background on the nosebleed. What's the cause of it? Frank L. Frank Baum was born with a heart condition, a severe heart condition, a heart murmur. So he throughout his life he was a very sick child. Like we talked about with Frank Sinatra, the same thing, a very sick child. This is one of the reasons why he was so into stories and he was so into his imagination because he couldn't really go out there and play like other kids. So he would sit there and he would daydream. He would dream of these um, magical like scenarios, right? So she says, you should really get your heart condition checked out, his sister says. But she says also that I have someone I want you to meet. So he's thinking, he says, who is she? And she's describing her, that she's pretty, she's educated. And then he says, she is the daughter of Matilda Gage. And he immediately knows who that is. Because keep in mind, uh, much of the suffragette movement took place in upstate New York, the Seneca Falls Conference, the biggest conference of Elizabeth Cady Stanton was there, Susan B. Anthony, all the famous suffragettes from this period, all were meeting mostly in upstate New York. That's why Sojourner, when she gave her famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech, that wasn't a conference in upstate New York. Upstate New York was basically the epicenter of the suffragette movement. So Matilda Gage would have been well known among this movement because she was a very prolific author and advocate for um, suffrage for the suffragettes, which was really for first wave feminism. So much like men today, how they react to feminists, he says, but she hates men, right? The idea has was then and is now and probably always will forever be that if a woman is a feminist, obviously that equates to hostility towards men, not necessarily, not in Maud Gage's case, and not even in most feminist case, even second wave feminism of Gloria Steinem variety, even. But I don't know about third wave feminism and fourth wave, probably do hate men. But anyway, that wasn't the case with her. But he's fearful that that will be. So he goes to meet her anyway. They go into the living room, and immediately he's caught off guard. He falls immediately in love with her, like love at first sight. He's left speechless. And in real life, they don't show this in the movie, but in real life, he says to her, he says, my sister says, I will love you. And then she jokes back, consider yourself loved. And uh, then they start, dancing. So they immediately hit it off, and their courtship goes on. And he's a traveling actor. He's a Shakespearean actor, right? And keep in mind, at this time, actors there were no movies. Movies did not exist yet. The first movie was like in the early 20th century, Birth of a Nation, like 1914, 1915. In the late 19th century, there were no movies. So actors, like I was explaining to Lisa, actors were actors on stage. That's what he was doing. She was going to college. She's about to enter into law school. So when he would be touring in New York, he would go to visit her, right? What they don't mention in the movie that was interesting is the film he was acting in was not, the play he was acting in was not a Shakespearean play. She says it's a Shakespearean play, but that's not really true. The play he was acting in when he happened to meet Maud was called The Maids of Erin, which was a play that he himself wrote. Because in the conversation that they have on the porch, uh, she he mentions uh, that he's been writing ever since he was little. That his father actually bought him a printing press when he was a little kid, because L. Frank Baum grew up a very privileged lifestyle, right? He grew up. His father was an entrepreneur. You know what I mean? So he grew up a very privileged lifestyle. So his father, knowing that he was sick, bought him this printing press so he could express himself creatively. But each and every time he would try to do something, it would always go awry. He would try to raise chickens, he would try to be a playwright, he would try to be an actor, but he was basically in his own play that he himself wrote when he met Moy Cage. But anyway, then he describes to her, he tells her to close her eyes, and he describes to her this this land, this beautiful land, and he's very vivid with his imagination, very descriptive with his using very descriptive language. And she's a very logical person. She's into education, she's into reality because of the way she was raised by her mom, right? To not value this sort of shit. You know what I mean? But she falls in love with him for this reason, and he asks to get married, and she goes in to ask her mother. Now, keep in mind, this is the 19th century. Asking asking somebody's parent for their hand in marriage was customary. People didn't just get married, or people just didn't elope. But the mother, Matilda Gage, played by Rue McClanahan, wants nothing to do with this. He's an actor. An actor was a very lowly profession because actors at this time, they weren't millionaires. They weren't famous people like we see on TV or we would later see. That the idea of a celebrity, the idea of celebrity culture didn't really come about in the United States or pretty much anywhere in the Western world outside of political figures and military figures until like the 1920s. This was the rise of celebrity, both in the film world as well as in the sports world. The likes of Charlie Chaplin, the likes of Rudolph Valentino, these guys became famous, these actors became famous in the 20s, just like with the sports stars, with Babe Ruth or, you know, or Johnny Unitas in football, Babe Ruth in baseball. They became famous in the 20s. Musicians too. The idea of a celebrity wasn't a thing, before that. The celebrities were like the president, military figures like Ulysses S. Grant, presidents like Abraham Lincoln or whatever, right? These were the famous people of the day, not actors. Actors were considered very lowly positions because, of course, Western culture has its origins in feudalistic European culture, and these type of people, these type of entertainers, they were considered like court gestures. They would be like considered like court gestures in the medieval world. You know what I mean? And even though we're not in the medieval world anymore, in this time in the 19th century, it was exactly the same. So it was a lowly position. She didn't find any respect in it. And she's like, absolutely not. I forbid you to throw away what we're trying to achieve, her goals of trying to achieve this feminism, to marry some actor. Because, and also keep in mind, another aspect of it is that if she got married, she would have to leave school. You know what I mean? These kind of career pursuits were only for single women. Oftentimes women would get a degree in teaching or get a degree in nursing or get a degree in clerical or do clerical work rather, and they would become mothers and they would have to leave their jobs. They couldn't really have it all. Like that didn't become a thing until like the 80s. You know what I mean? So they couldn't be a career woman and be, a wife and mother as well. She's like, you're throwing it all away. You're throwing my work away. You're throwing your own work away. You're about to be a lawyer. You're about to be accepted into law school in Columbia. What are you doing? She says, well, I love Frank and I'm going to marry him anyway. And if you're not accepted, fine. We'll elope and we'll do our own thing. The mother is shocked, but the mother doesn't come around. And he's in the waiting room, and he's like in the next room, and he's waiting and he's anticipating, but he's thinking. He's like, what can I really offer her financially that will be substantial, that will go to a lawyer? I'm just an actor. I'm just a creative person. I'm not a business minded individual, really. You know what I mean? Like he's a dreamer. He's somebody who dreams. He's somebody who he's not really that practical, right? And that will come to really bite him in the ass later on in his life. But see, she was the perfect person. She was the perfect person to be by his side because eventually in their marriage, uh, she would be the one that would manage the money. She would be the one to make sure that the family did not go broke because L. Frank Baum, he didn't believe in saving. He didn't believe in frugalness. He didn't believe in practicality. His head was always in the clouds. That's the type of individual he was. You know what I mean? So she comes back and she says, "No, you bring in color to my life. You bring in joy to my life, and I love you more than anything. Don't ever say that." She's always encouraging him throughout the movie and throughout his real life, encouraging him to do better. So they get married, they get eloped anyway, and they fast forward to he's doing one of his plays. He's doing one of his plays, and at this time, again, there's no electricity, so uh, they're using torches, fire torches for light in the play. And he's doing the play, he's acting in the play as a cop. One of the extras falls asleep and there's a fire. So nobody gets paid. Everybody's pissed. But in the midst of it, she finally is fed up and she said, "Frank, we can't keep doing this. You're putting myself and the baby in jeopardy." And he's excited. He's like, "No, Maud, wait a minute. Everything will get better. We have the first full house we've ever had." But he doesn't even realize that she said, "I'm pregnant." She basically said in so many words, "I'm pregnant. I'm having a kid." Right? And then he's excited. He's like, "We're going to have a baby by December. We're going to have a baby." So they finally have their first child. And Frank has to do something else different. And that's when he goes on the road for sales, right? Going around doing sales, something that is more practical. But at this time, he hears about his Maud's sister has moved out to the Dakota Territory, aka where Kansas is. The Kansas, because keep in mind these areas were not official states until the later 1800s. These were wide open prairies, and he feels like a lot of explorers, like the early explorers that came from Europe, right? When it's a new world, it's new opportunities. There's less competitiveness than in New York, which is more settled. I can do a lot with this. Particularly, he has the idea of opening up a mega store, kind of like Walmart. Like he had the idea for the first Walmart. Walmart was opened up in Arkansas, not too far away, by the Waltons. So, but he had this particular idea like first, and he was going to call it Baum's Bazaar, and it was going to be like, stuff from Europe, stuff from Asia, stuff from Middle East, stuff from every part of the world, that you really couldn't get in the Dakota Territory. In Aberdeen, right, was the town he settled in. Now Aberdeen, then it was part of the Kansas area, right? But now Aberdeen was part of North Dakota, right? Once they became official states, they got all shuffled around. So he's excited. He wants to start this new venture. But immediately when he goes to take his family out there, he sees that it is not like New York City. He wasn't in New York City, but it's not like New York State, right? It is not as settled. It is not as civilized. Everybody's uncouth. There's a guy shooting bottles down with his pistol as Frank and them are driving into the town, and his son is scared. He has his son Frank Jocelyn Baum, his firstborn son. Jocelyn is the middle name of Matilda Gage. And he's ready to get a fresh new start, but he really doesn't know how. And when they go to see their new house, there's a girl there, and it's his niece, and she's playing hide and seek, and he says, "What's your name?" And she says, "My name is Dorothy." So automatically, you know that this girl will inevitably become the main character of his book. Now, how does the story get started of The Wizard of Oz? One day, before they're getting ready to go to church, uh, his son Frank, he's looking for his razors to shave because this time they used the manual razor. They didn't have electric razors at this time. I don't know if we ever talked about it, but the movie The Color Purple, there's a scene where Whoopi Goldberg's character Celie is shaving Danny Glover's character Mister with the old school razors. They could really kill somebody. They could really hurt somebody. So he tells his son, he always told his son, don't play with my razors in the house. So the son tries to work around it by going outside the house and jumping out the window. But now they live on the second story. So the son he's he's caught in the window and he's scared. Right? And the mother's scared, the father's scared. He's like, but you told me never to play with your razors in the house. And and the mom is like freaking out. But what Frank does is he creates a diversion. He says, "Let me tell you a story about uh, a cyclone, a tornado, who took this magic land that you couldn't get to by a carriage, you couldn't get to by an airplane, you couldn't get to anywhere else, any ways else, except by going in this tornado. And then one day a tornado came and took a whole house and took it to this magic land. And originally it was a boy. And this distracts the boy long enough for his father to go up and grab him out the window and and save him. But the mother gets mad at Frank. She says, "You shouldn't leave sharp objects where little hands can get them." It's like, shouldn't you get mad at the boy? He was told previously that he shouldn't be touching this stuff, and he touched it anyway. But the story is very intriguing to both the wife and to the little boy, and he has to come up with something else to continue it. So uh, that's how it started. Now, he opens up Baum's Bazaar, and people are first day, opening day, people are crowding around and everything. And there's a little person who comes into town and applies for a job. And this little person, Frank doesn't discriminate. He hires him, but he becomes an inspiration for the Munchkins in The Wizard of Oz. So each and every person that he meets becomes an inspiration for another character in The Wizard of Oz, including the Scarecrow. Later on, they build a Scarecrow, and the little girl Dorothy asks a question. She's like, "There's a crow sitting on the Scarecrow's shoulder." She's like, "Well, why isn't this Scarecrow scaring this crow away?" He's like, "Well, he would have if he had a brain, but the farmer who made him forgot to give him a brain. He gave him everything, but he forgot to give him a brain." And she's like, "A scarecrow can have a brain?" So immediately that's the inspiration for the Scarecrow. And the business wasn't doing so well. But Maud, as she's telling her story to the reporter, she's like, Frank was always optimistic, but that summer, that winter, something happened that even he was not optimistic about. Because what happened they don't mention this in the movie, but what happened with the store was that there was a drought. There was a drought in the late 1880s, I think like 1880, 86, 87, along with a depression. And because there was this drought, environmental factors can often have a drastic effect on businesses, particularly in areas like this. It was like a precursor to what the Dust Bowl would be in the Midwest. You know what I mean? So that's why the business wasn't doing so well. Like people couldn't afford things. So of course, the business was going to go under. But eventually, it really starts raining after that, and the girl, she gets sick. You know what I mean? And they show Frank rushing to her side, and she's in the bed, she's coughing. There was a first scene where they're in the store together, he and the little girl, and she coughs, and she says, "Is your mom giving you?" He says, "Is your mom giving you something for that?" She goes, "Some stuff on a spoon." And he goes, "Some stuff on a spoon? Ew!" Like his ability to relate to kids was crazy. Like even when his wife wants him to do something, He's telling this story to the kids about the scarecrow hawking like a crow. He cares more about these kids than what he has going on with the store because he sees the store is not being profitable. So he goes to visit her, and she wants to know more about the story. Tell me about the story of the kid in the magic land that goes up with the house, the boy. He says, I want to tell you a secret. It's not a little boy, it's a little girl, and her name was Dorothy. And she was living with her Uncle Henry and Aunt Annie M. He couldn't think of a name for the aunt. She thought of it Emily, but they call her M. Now, from what I read in real life, there is some discrepancy with the accuracy of this particular part of the story. The name M was not something that she came up with, and it was not short for Emily. That was assumed in the 1939 film when uh, Dorothy goes to meet with Marvel the magician, and he guesses her aunt's name. That was assumed within the 1939 film. Originally, M was just the letter M for his wife's first name, Maud. But here they say it's that. So the little girl passes away, and he immediately puts that in his story as well. Another thing he puts in his story was Matilda Gage does not go away. She's still doing her suffragette stuff. She stays with them, and she's typing away, typing away. The little boy is playing in the living room, and she's like, I need quiet, please, because she's writing her book, right? Her suffragette newspaper. And he says, I'll try. She's going to need more than try. And then Frank says, I'll tell you a story. And then he starts telling the story about the two witches. She says, isn't it late for a witch story? You're going to give them nightmares. He goes, no, Mother Gage. You're thinking all witches are bad, but there's a good witch. It all depends on what direction you come from in the magic land. The witch of the east is evil. And that's when he imagines the witch of the east to be his mother-in-law Matilda, as she's typing away. The outfit of the Wicked Witch of the East uh, comes to him, and then he imagines his wife as Glinda, the Good Witch, right? The Witch of the North. So that's where the witches come in at, and then after she passes away, but when she's about to pass away, the little girl, he tells her the story of the Tin Man and how the Tin Man was out there cutting tin. He had everything, but he didn't have a heart. Man, he says maybe it was good he didn't have a heart because his heart could never be broken. Obviously, this is a heartbreaking thing. So that's where the Tin Man comes in. Now, the Cowardly Lion comes in because after the bazaar closed down, he starts a newspaper. And this is where a lot of they don't show this in the movie, but a lot of the controversy comes in real life with regards to L. Frank Baum and some of the things that he wrote with regards to Native Americans, because this is the Dakota Territory again, and it was Crazy Horse's Revolt, right, that resulted in the massacre of Wounded Knee in 1889. Uh, and white settlers, like the Bombs, had harsh things to say about Native Americans because it was basically a war between white settlers and Native Americans. Think of how Israeli settlers today in modern times react to Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. You know what I mean? They don't react favorably to those Palestinians because they're constantly at war. It was the same thing with whites and Native Americans. So in his newspaper, he printed some disparaging things about Native Americans, basically saying that it would be better for Native Americans if they no longer existed because they create such an enmity for between themselves and the whites, and there'd be constant wars going on. So because of that, people retroactively assumed that he was racist against Native Americans. But because there were black people working in his store, right? The West, like I was explaining to Lisa, was something different than the South. They didn't really have Jim Crow laws in the West like they did in the South. You know, because the black population was much smaller. But with regards to Native Americans, yeah, he did have these views. Now, some would look at the articles in his paper, right, and say that uh, the articles were satirical. Like he wasn't really, he was mocking the perception of a white colonialist, a white racist, and like doing it in a sarcastic tone. Some would look at, some would see that because his his mother-in-law, who see in the movie, he and the mother-in-law are really antagonistic towards towards one another, right? But in real life, throughout the whole movie until the end. But in real life, Matilda Gage and L. Frank Baum really became friends later on and became kindred spirits because he would use his platform to advocate for women's suffrage. Because in 1869, the Wyoming territory, further out west in Wyoming, became the first part of the United States to grant women the right to vote on a local level. So he wanted the Dakota Territory to do the same thing and grant women the right to vote because they had these territories that weren't official states yet. They had a lot of more autonomy uh, then, and they had a lot more independence than the ones that were states. So if you were going to get women's suffrage done, it was going to have to be in these unincorporated territories. The same way, like 40 or 50 years before that, like in the 1850s, they thought about with Kansas as far as bleeding. You know about bleeding Kansas, where settlers from the South came in and settlers from other parts of the country, particularly the North, came in, and there was a clash between them. That was one of the precursors of, well, the Civil War. So these Western territories, they were more liberal. So if you were going to get something done like women's suffrage, they were going to have to do it first, and they were going to have to inspire the other more settled parts of the country. That was the thought behind it. So he would use his paper to advocate for women's suffrage. He would also use his paper to talk about the political goings on of the day and the local goings on. And in one instance, he mistakenly prints that a local woman's birthday party is going to be the pig party of the century, basically calling this man's wife a pig. And the man gets upset. He starts badgering Frank, badgering him. And he's like, wait a minute, listen, I'm tired. I haven't gotten much sleep. I'm going through a lot of stuff personally. Please, what do you want me to do? Hang myself? And he challenges him to a duel. Now, I was explaining to Lisa, and Lisa already known because she referenced this, is the duel between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr that resulted in the death of the first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Also, the duel of Andrew Jackson, also the seventh president of the United States, engaged in. Well, Andrew Jackson was in the early 19th century. Uh, so this was a thing in the 19th century, duels, right? Where somebody would challenge you, and it would basically result in your death. You know what I mean? Like the law wasn't robust out there in the West. And this is the way things were done, and you couldn't refuse it. So Frank is scared because he already has a heart condition. He's like, shit, I could die. You know, but they tell him, listen, you are an actor. Pretend like you're acting in a stage play. Just act like you aren't scared. So he's chewing tobacco. He's out there dueling with this guy. But it turns out the guy is also scared. And as soon as Frank pulls his gun out of the holster, the guy runs away. So basically, that's the inspiration for the Cowardly Lion. Basically, this lion that roars and roars and roars, pussycat. So now they leave Aberdeen and they go to Chicago, right? Because the World's Fair, 1893, the World's Fair is about to go down, right? 400 years of European settlement on the continent of North America with Christopher Columbus's arrival. And they build the White City, this city of dreams in the Chicago World's Fair. And that's the basis for the Emerald City. Finally, it's Frank's birthday, and they have the birthday cake and everything. And Frank's wife gives him a leather bond that says "The Magic Land" by L. Frank Baum, basically a journal to write the stories. And he's like, she's like, you've been telling the parts of this story for years and years, but you've never actually put pen to paper and written it down. Do it for me, do it for the kids, do it for Dorothy, his niece that passed away. So finally, uh, he tries to do it, but the family needs money, especially they're moving into Chicago. They need a lot more money. So he goes on the road again, but his heart condition is getting the worst of him, right? And the thing is, too, he starts writing books, Mother Goose in Prose. He puts out his first book, and it does well critically. People like it. Basically, these nursery rhymes, but he puts stories to the nursery rhymes. They like it. He meets W. Denslow, which is his artist that he works with. And people like it, critics like it, but the people don't like it. It doesn't sell. So he's still struggling. And the mother-in-law wants him to work at her brother's store. She's like, why don't you give this shit up already? Why don't you engage in something more logical? Again, this is different than real life, because in real life, she was supportive of him. You know what I mean? Because she was an author herself. She had published Women, the Church, and the Vote. Right? She believed that people do need fantasy in their life eventually, but I guess in the beginning, in real life, she really didn't. But the wife is sticking up for him no matter what. And he comes out with a sequel to Mother Goose, Father Goose, right, which is basically from a male point of view. And that does really well. That's the first time ever that he's been successful with his writing to publish or to start to work on the Oz books while at the same time still being on the road. So Denslow draws Dorothy, and they're off to the races with writing the book. They finally write the book. But the problem is, nobody will publish this. All the publishers, including the ones that did Mother Goose and Father Goose, believe that there's no market for an American fairy tale. All the fairy tales are set in England, right? The 1860s. Lewis Carroll comes out with Alice in Wonderland. They had the Brothers Grimm. They came out with in 1812. They came out with Snow White. They're all set in medieval times in England. None of them are set in the United States, and they believe there's no market for an American fairy tale set in Kansas, right? About a girl from Kansas, about American things, about republicanism, about freedom, about democracy, about bimetallism, all these metaphors that we talked about that exist within the story of the Wizard of Oz, right? They believe there is no market whatsoever for this type of stuff. So he goes to different publishers, and they all turn it down. Finally, one night, he gets so frustrated that he takes it out of his file cabinet where he has the papers in there, and he starts burning it. And the wife wakes up and says, Frank, what the hell's going on? He says, they never want this book to see the light of day. He believes the book is cursed. So before they destroy it, I'll destroy it myself. But as going through his papers, he sees that, hey, wait a minute, I was a publisher. I published my newspaper. So I'll just self-publish this, right? And use the proceeds, use the money from the Father Goose and Prose and the Father Goose and the Mother Goose and Prose novels to publish my own work, publish The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Now, the name Oz comes about because he doesn't have anything that will tie the story together, any bow that will tie the story together. But one night, when he's on the train traveling, doing his salesman job, he encounters this guy just talking a lot, right? Talking a lot of bullshit. He's like, wait a minute, that's it. I'll make a fake wizard, a guy that's just a bullshit artist, and I'll call it. So he wants to test it on the kids. So he calls all the kids in, right? A bunch of boys and girls, and he says, they say to him, Mr. Baum, what's the name of the magic land? You always call it just the magic land. What's the name? And he's trying to think, he's trying to brainstorm. And while this is happening, Matilda Gage, his mother-in-law, who hasn't really been interested in these kind of books, is listening, right? She's pretending not to listen, pretending to read herself, but she's listening. You know how you pretend to do something, but you're really eavesdropping? So he's looking around, right? And he says, the name of the magic land is Oz, O-Z, right? File cabinet, stuff from O to Z. That's where he comes up with the name, right? And originally it's called the Emerald City, the book, right? So he starts to self-publish it. But his wife, the wife is finally fed up with it. She's like, listen, Frank, we're finally getting some money in here. We're finally doing well. We struggled all these years, but we're finally doing, something. And the mother-in-law, again, a nosy buddy at the mother-in-law, overhears it and says, no, I believe in them. People need fantasy. People need the dream. And if you love them, you'll stick by them. He says, I need to do this. And it's crazy because they never had a fight. Throughout this whole movie, they never had a fight, Frank and Maud. But, they finally did. He says, I need to do this. I need to publish this book, right? But he wants to come up with a different name because what's not mentioned in the movie is that Frank, as well as Maud somewhat, as well as Matilda, were part of this movement, this religious movement that came about in the 19th century called the Theophysist movement, basically a kind of spiritualist movement. It was spearheaded by Helena Blavatsky, the healing power of ancient stones, and they believed in a non-denominational approach to religion, gaining, wisdom from the different schools of thought, Confucianism, Islam, Buddhism, outside of, Western Judeo-Christianity. He was very much into that. He believed in the power of stones. He believed that if you name a book after a stone, it is bad luck. So they wanted to change the name from the Emerald City to something else. So they start brainstorming. And finally, the mother-in-law comes up with a name. What about the Wizard of Oz? And they said, well, what kind of wizard? It's a wonderful wizard. So that's the name, the Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And finally, he publishes it. And it's Christmas time towards the end. And he's looking to get an advance on the sales of the book to buy gifts for his family because he's really struggling because everything, the proceeds from the previous books are all going to the publishing company to publish the book, right? So he goes and the boss gives it to him, says, why not? It's yours, right? And he goes in the elevator. He doesn't know how much it is. It's thousands of dollars. And he opens it up. He says, hallelujah. And when he goes home, he pretends like he doesn't know what's in it. And the wife sees it and she is shocked, right? And then, they put on the old record player, right? The first record player, the Vitrola, and they start dancing and he gives her an emerald ring. And it's a really sweet movie because this woman struggled with this man. This man was basically a failure for most of his life until this book came out. He really wasn't a success at pretty much anything, and he tried his hand at everything. And then she talks about how he finally fell ill. He came out with the play in 1900. The book was published in 1900. He came out with the play in 1902, the first film in 1910, which was a silent film. It's not talked about in the movie, but he had his own studio production, the Oz Film Production. They later moved out to California where he starts that. He was the one who produced the first Wizard of Oz movie, silent film in 1910, based on the book as well as the stage play. So basically, he had the idea that Walt Disney would later have himself. And it's funny because they have a lot in common. Both men um, were basically failures at everything they did in life until they finally did this one thing. And while Frank lived in the Midwest in Kansas, uh, so did Walt Disney. Walt Disney came from uh, Missouri and lived for a while in Kansas City, Missouri, as well as in the state of Kansas. So they lived Midwestern lifestyles. And they both were kind of, trying to do work in other people's businesses and establishments, and it really didn't work out. Disney with Universal Studios, and getting robbed of his first creation, which was Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and L. Frank Baum, not having any success with the stuff that he was doing up until the creation of the Wizard of Oz. So he had the idea for um, a production studio immediately when he moves out to California. They don't show this in the movie, and I wish they did. But unfortunately, what happened was, even with the success of the Oz books, he eventually gambles away all his money on the production studio once he moves out to California, and they lose it. So that's one of the reasons why they were forced to sell the rights eventually, and why the stuff became public domain in the battles. Because just like with another parallel with him and Walt Disney was that Walt Disney lost the rights to his first creation. He creates Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and he loses the rights to it, and then later has to create Mickey Mouse in 1923. So Frank is the same way. But the end of the movie, though, the end of this movie, they show is him laying in the bed saying that Maud is still his princess, and they don't show what was his last quote in life. He says, "Now we move on to the shifting sands." Basically, he and Maud, they had years and years together. Um, his life's work, his political life's work, was women's suffrage, and finally, a year after he passes away, uh, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution is passed, and women do get the right to vote. So uh, his political ambitions, his life work politically was achieved, but neither he nor Matilda Gage, his mother-in-law, lived to see it. But it eventually did happen. But one thing that's not mentioned too is his service in World War One. He was heavily involved with World War One. You know, he wrote some articles for in support of the troops in World War One. Initially, he was a pacifist. He did not support America's involvement in World War One. But after the attack on the Lusitania, like most Americans, he put his support behind it, and he was involved with the troops there. So much like uh, Stan Lee and Dr. Seuss, they were involved with World War II. They contributed as entertainers and as editorial people. He himself did too with regards to World War One, and but never in the Oz books. One of the things like is not mentioned either. The Oz books were for him a gift and a curse because 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 But I wish they really showed that in regards to his service in World War One. But like I was saying, he was trapped in this because much like Dr. Seuss or Jim Henson or Walt Disney or Vince McMahon, these guys, or even George Lucas, they were successful in this medium, but they wanted to do other things. But it was a gift and a curse because that was all they could do. You know, like the fans of Oz, the little kid fans of Oz, and he didn't bring in the World War One into the books in Oz, thankfully. And one of the newspaper articles at that time said the only place in the world that World War One did not touch was the land of Oz. But the little kid fans of the series, the Oz books, that's all they wanted from him. They didn't want anything else more serious. He wanted to do other serious stuff because he had other interests. But it's like that always. It's like that here on this channel. Even though Lisa encourages me to do other things, I started off as a wrestling channel, and you feel pigeonholed. You know what I mean? When you only have done certain things and those things are successful, you become pigeonholed. Walt Disney felt like this. He wanted to do educational stuff. That's why he made Fantasia to get kids interested in classical music. He wanted to do serious movies other than animation, but he was just never could. Jim Henson wanted to do adult stuff, but he was stuck with the Muppets. Dr. Seuss wanted to do serious stuff. He got stuck with his child's book. Vince McMahon wanted to do stuff outside of wrestling. He got stuck. So L. Frank Baum was similar. They got trapped by their own genius. George Lucas has said for years he wanted to do independent films, but got stuck doing Star Wars. Even Sylvester Stallone, who wrote Rocky, he gets stuck doing this Rocky shit, and he wants to do other things, but people don't recognize him for those other things. They only recognize him for Rocky. You know what I mean? So like L. Frank Baum was similar. You know what I mean? He never really got to explore anything outside of The Wizard of Oz, and when he did, it wasn't successful. But the movie ends with the beginning of the 1939 film, and this was a cool movie because I wish it had been in theaters, though. I wish it had gone in a little bit more of a serious tone about who the man was, and how it came to be, similar to Finding Neverland, starring Johnny Depp and Kate Winslet. Sorry, I always get them mixed up. Clara Danes is Romeo and Juliet. Kate Winslet is Titanic. But anyway, I wish they'd gone to it a little bit more with regards to that. The serious tone of his life and how he felt trapped by these Oz books. Like he's like, stop talking to me about the Wizard of Oz. I don't want to write any more Oz books. I want to write more serious stuff because he was political. Now there is talk about a political allegory within the Wizard of Oz, but he didn't write it for that. You know what I mean? That was just something that professors later on saw, into it. Maybe he did have some political allegories in it, but really, it was a children's book. It was a book for kids. It wasn't anything political. Now, Wicked pays tribute to him. Forgotten. He was forgotten. His wife was right there at the premiere, and nobody knew who she was. And that was in '39. Could you imagine in 2025 or even 1995 when the book Wicked came out? He was forgotten. You know what I mean? Because the 1939 movie overshadowed everything. You know what I mean? And that became, most of us didn't even know that there were Oz books. That's why when you look at 1985's version, Return to Oz, you're like, wait a minute. What the hell is this? you know what I mean? But it's his second book, The Marvelous Land of Oz and Oz of Ozma. Right? Even his first grandchild was named Ozma. Right? Which is the Queen of Oz. So his whole life was defined by this Oz thing. It was a gift and a curse in many ways. But Wicked pays tribute to him with the main character, Elphaba, being a combination of his name, L. Frank Baum. So anyway, I felt it was a good movie. If you want to look into his life further, this movie is good, as well as the documentary that PBS did on him, American Experience, called American Oz. That goes into a little bit more seriousness of his life. This is a brief overview of him, of of how he came to create the Wizard of Oz. Not really his life per se, other stuff that he did, and the controversy surrounding him. I don't really see it as much of a controversy, honestly, guys, because you guys, and when I say you guys, I mean the super woke people, right? And I'm not a Republican. I'm not trying to, come after people on the left, but some of the super woke people fail to realize that people are a product of their time. You know what I mean? You cannot sit there and judge a man born in the 1850s by today's standards. You know what I mean? We know that there was racism and animosity towards whites and Native Americans on the American continent. So him being a white man, of course, he's going to have a white man's perspective. He's not going to have a Native American's perspective, right? Even white liberals and progressives, which he was a member of at this time, until Frank Baum was on the left, were not as enlightened as today's white liberals and progressives. The same thing when you look at Abraham Lincoln and you go, well, okay, when he did the 1860 debate against Douglas, he was not a hardcore abolitionist, or he was a gradual abolitionist, right? Or he was just against the expansion of slavery in the West. He wasn't for the abolition of slavery in the South. But of course, or he believed in white supremacy. He believed that white people were superior to black people, right? But of course, why wouldn't he believe this? He's a white man of his time. People are products of their time. You can't judge, it's unfair to judge a historical figure by the standards of your time that you live in. It's really unfair. You know what I mean? A lot of these woke people, that's what they do. They'll look at something and they'll go, oh, well, he was a white supremacist, right? Because he said something, that we would consider abhorrent in our time, but you're judging them by our standards in our modern times, and that's not fair. For his time, Frank Baum was pretty enlightened, especially considering the fact that most men were not on board with voting rights for women, and and that was the political struggle of the day. Each and every decade, and each and every time period, APOC has a political struggle, whether it be marijuana, whether it be like with you guys, LGBT legalization. You guys will even look at somebody like Barack Obama, who supported Oberfield versus Hodges, but you'll look at his 2008 campaign and you'll say, well, Obama was homophobic because he said in his 2008 campaign he didn't support gay marriage. Like, you do understand that people can change their views and their views can become enlightened, right? You do understand that people's views are not static, right? And then just because somebody made a mistake before, I used to be homophobic. I was homophobic when I was younger, right? And I don't have writings that are homophobic, but I had some freestyles that I recorded when I was younger that were pretty homophobic stuff, using the F word. Now, I later came around and I'm enlightened and I no longer support those views. But to you guys, you know what I mean? Once somebody has bigoted views, they have bigoted. You know what I mean? Like, there's no redemption in you. You know what I mean? In some of you guys. And you expect everybody to be perfect and people to have no prejudices and have no bigotries at all. And that's just not possible. You know what I mean? You're like the Puritans. The Puritans wanted the best Christians with nobody that was a sinless life when they came here in the 17th century. That's what you guys want. The woke becomes like the new Puritans, and it's just not possible, guys. So a lot of people are looking at L. Frank Baum and saying, oh, well, he was a bigot, he was anti-Native American. But look at where he was living. Look at the situation that was going on. Look at the historical context. Not making an excuse for it, but you're just judging it from your standard as a modern-day 21st century American, looking at it, looking back at it. Anyway, guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to see my next video coming out. Overall, I give this movie a 8 out of 10. Like I said, what takes away from it is the fact that it was a TV movie, and it was kind of it was kind of a hagiography. It kind of made him like a saintly figure. It didn't discuss necessarily the more controversial aspects of his life. So maybe that wasn't even known back then in 1990. I don't know. But peace, guys. Yeah.